Hello, my name is Gary, and I was raised in the Western United States, so I'm a native English speaker. I hope that you will enjoy this YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us.
The Tale of Jolly Robin by Arthur Scott Bailey, 1877 to 1949. Chapter 17, Only a Rooster. Jasper Jay spent several days searching for the great golden bird that Jolly Robin had described, but no matter how hard he looked, Jasper couldn't find the magnificent creature anywhere. He began to suspect it might all be a hoax, just as he claimed earlier. Jasper was about to give up when he happened to run into Benny Barn Swallow one day. As they chatted, Jasper mentioned he was looking for Jolly Robin's mysterious bird. Benny's eyes lit up and he quickly asked, "Do you mean the golden bird?" "The bird of brass, more like," Jasper replied with a sneer, his nose in the air. "Have you seen him?" "Actually, yes," Benny said. "He's right near my house." Now Jasper knew Benny lived in a mud nest under the eaves of Farmer Green's barn. He shouted excitedly, "Then my search is over. I'll head to the barn this afternoon and teach that upstart a lesson." News of the upcoming fight spread like wildfire. As soon as he heard about it, Jolly Robin rushed to the barn to warn the golden bird and begged him to leave Pleasant Valley before trouble arrived. But the dazzling bird didn't respond. Jolly thought the stranger was deliberately ignoring him, which only made him more anxious. Jolly spent the day singing to steady his nerves. "If only I hadn't mentioned the golden bird to anyone," he lamented. Maybe he'd have left before Jasper got wind of it. Jasper, on the other hand, made sure everyone knew about the showdown. "You don't want to miss this," he boasted. "I'm going to whip that golden bird and pull out his tail feathers." By late afternoon, birds from all over Pleasant Valley had gathered in the orchard. Jolly Robin, his wife, old Mr. Crow, Rusty Wren, Bobby Bobolink, Miss Kitty Catbird, and many others came to see the spectacle. The air buzzed with chatter, but Jasper's loud bragging stood out. He was so full of himself that some birds quietly joked it might not be a bad idea if the golden bird taught Jasper a lesson. Finally, Jasper announced he was ready. The crowd followed him eagerly as he strutted to Farmer Green's barn. They perched on the barn's roof, gazing at the golden bird who glowed brilliantly in the golden light of the setting sun. For most of the crowd, it was their first glimpse of the bird, and they were awestruck. Jolly Robin and Benny Barn Swallow, having seen him before, watched in quiet anticipation. To Jasper, the golden bird seemed enormous, perched proudly on a high rod above the roof, radiating an air of disdain. He ignored the gathering entirely. After a moment of silence, Jasper broke the tension. "Nonsense," he scoffed. "This isn't some grand golden bird. It's just a barnyard rooster." Chapter 18, On Top of the Barn. All the birds perched on the roof of Farmer Green's barn quickly realised that Jasper Jay had been telling the truth. The golden bird was indeed a rooster, just as Jasper had claimed. But they found it odd that a rooster would sit so high up on a perch. "It seems to me," said old Mr. Crow, "like he flew up there, landed on that rod, and is now too scared to fly back down." "I'll knock him off," Jasper Jay squawked, preparing to dive at the stranger. "I wouldn't do that," said Jolly Robin. "Ooh, of course you wouldn't," Jasper shot back. "You're too scared to try something like that." "It's not that," Jolly Robin replied, "even though he's 10 times my size. What I mean is he seems harmless. Sure, he looks a bit too proud, but he hasn't hurt anyone, so why should we hurt him?" "He's a barnyard bird and he belongs on the ground," Jasper insisted. "If we let him stay up here, who knows what Farmer Green's fowls will do next? His hens and roosters, hundreds of them, might start flying where they don't belong. This golden fellow is setting a bad example. It's up to me to teach him a lesson." The real reason Jasper wanted to knock the golden rooster off his perch, however, was envy. The rooster's shimmering golden feathers made Jasper's own bright blue coat look dull in comparison, and Jasper couldn't stand it. "Here I go," Jasper shouted, flying straight at the golden bird. Jasper struck the rooster hard, causing it to spin twice on its perch. But the rooster didn't lose his balance or even say a word. "This time I'll pull out his tail feathers," Jasper squawked angrily, diving at the bird again. But try as he might, Jasper couldn't pluck a single feather. In fact, he only managed to hurt his own beak. He tried several more times, but with no success. Meanwhile, some of the other birds began to chuckle, and old Mr. Crow even let out a loud guffaw. Jasper, pretending not to notice, grew angrier. "Maybe we should just leave," Jolly Robin finally suggested. "Maybe you should leave," Jasper snapped, his temper flaring. Instead of attacking the rooster again, Jasper turned on Jolly Robin. Unfortunately for Jasper, he had forgotten that Jolly Robin's wife was nearby. Suddenly it seemed as if there were half a dozen Jolly Robins, and all of them had furious wives too. Jasper fought with all his might, but he was no match for the Robins. Soon he gave up and flew off toward the woods. As he fled, a single blue tail feather with a white tip drifted down into the barnyard, where Johnny Green had been standing for some time, watching the commotion on the barn roof. Johnny picked up the feather and tucked it into his hat. Later, when he told his father how a blue jay had tried to fight the new weather vane and a pair of robins, Farmer Green threw back his head and laughed. "Don't you believe me?" Johnny asked. "Here's the blue jay's feather. Doesn't that prove I'm telling the truth?" But Farmer Green just laughed harder. It wasn't that he didn't believe his son. It was just that the story was almost too strange to be true. Chapter 19. Curious Mr. Crow. Living near the farmhouse in the orchard, Jolly Robin and his wife knew more about Farmer Green's family than most of the other birds in Pleasant Valley, except perhaps Rusty Wren. As a house wren, Rusty was naturally close to the people in the farmhouse. However, all summer, Rusty Wren stayed close to home. It was Jolly Robin who shared the latest news and odd stories from the orchard with the creatures of the woods. His tale about the golden bird was just one of the many fascinating stories he told to his curious woodland friends. Because of his cheerful nature and all the intriguing stories he had, Jolly Robin was always welcomed wherever he went. Whenever he met friends in the woods or fields, they'd stop to ask if he had any new stories to share. One day, Mr. Crow, ever the gossip, flew all the way across the cornfield where he spotted Jolly Robin eating wild cherries in the woods. "So, what's the latest?" Mr. Crow asked. The old crow was always eager to hear something new. "I don't think anything would interest you," Jolly Robin said with a grin, "unless it's about the four-armed man." Mr. Crow looked up in surprise. "What did you say?" "The four-armed man," Jolly Robin repeated. "Is this some kind of joke?" Mr. Crow asked, sceptical as always. He didn't like being tricked. "I've heard of and seen a two-headed calf, but a four-armed man seems too far-fetched. I'd have to see it with my own eyes to believe it." Jolly Robin chuckled. "It's no joke," he said, still laughing. "Then why are you laughing?" Mr. Crow asked sharply. "Nothing," Jolly Robin replied. "It's just how I am." "Fine," Mr. Crow said. "I'll let that slide. But where is this four-armed man?" "In the barnyard," Jolly Robin told him. "I've seen him walking between the house and the barn. He looks a lot like the hired man, but of course it can't be him. As you know, the hired man has only two arms." "I need to see this creature for myself," Mr. Crow said. "When's a good time?" "Milking time," Jolly Robin replied. "Meet me by the bridge down the road when you see Johnny Green and old dog Spot bringing the cows in from the pasture this afternoon, and I'll show you the four-armed man. You'll see I'm not joking." "I'll be there," Mr. Crow promised, "but with one condition. You have to tell me if this strange man has ever fired a gun. If a two-armed man can shoot one gun, I don't see why a four-armed man couldn't shoot two at once. If that's the case, I'd rather not be around." Jolly Robin had to hold back another laugh. The thought of the four-armed man aiming two guns at Mr. Crow was too funny to ignore. He could hardly speak for a moment, but shook his head. "So you think it's safe?" Mr. Crow asked, looking worried. "Definitely," Jolly Robin assured him. "He's only carrying milk pails." "OK then," Mr. Crow said. "I'll meet you on the bridge." Chapter 20. The Four-Armed Man. Old dog Spot was herding the last cow down the lane when Jolly Robin and Mr. Crow met on the bridge near the farmhouse, as they had planned. "All right then," said Mr. Crow, even before his broad wings had settled smoothly against his back. "All right, where's the four-armed man?" Jolly Robin looked towards the barnyard. "I don't see him yet," he said, "but he should be here any minute now. Let's move over to the big oak tree, where we'll get a better view of the barnyard from the top." Mr. Crow agreed right away, so they flew to the oak and waited. They saw the cows walk into the barn, each finding her place in one of the 2 long rows of stalls across the wide aisle that ran the length of the barn. During the winter, the men would walk down that aisle with large forkfuls of hay, tossing it down in front of the cows, who would munch it contentedly. But it was summer now, and the cows found their own food in the pasture on the hillside. They only came to the barn to be milked. "It's milking time right now," Jolly Robin said. "Pretty soon you'll see the 4-armed man come out of the barn with pails of milk. He'll carry them into the house and set them in the buttery. We'll get a good look at him without him knowing." And that's exactly what happens. "Here he comes," Jolly Robin exclaimed, as a figure stepped out of the barn and began walking towards the house. "Now you'll see I wasn't joking when I told you about this strange man. You should be glad I told you about the 4-armed man, Mr. Crow. I bet you've never seen anything as weird as he is, even if you've seen a 2-headed calf." Jolly Robin said a lot more to Mr. Crow and was so pleased that he started singing a song. But Mr. Crow quickly hushed him. "Keep quiet," he whispered. "Do you want to get me into trouble? It's bad enough to be tricked like this, without you making such a noise. Farmer Green might shoot me if he sees me too close to his house." I thought, Mr. Crow added, "I thought you were laughing too much when you told me about the 4-armed man. It's a hoax, a joke, a trick, and a very poor one at that." Jolly Robin was confused by Mr. Crow's grumpy comments. "I don't understand how you can say that," he said. Mr. Crow looked closely at his small companion before responding. Then he asked, "Do you mean to say you've never heard of a neck yoke?" "Never," cried Jolly Robin. "Well, well," said Mr. Crow. "Some people's ignorance is beyond me. That wasn't a 4-armed man." "You said he looked like Farmer Green's hired man, and no wonder. He is the hired man. He found an old neck yoke somewhere. It's just a piece of wood that fits around his shoulders and neck, sticking out on each side like arms. He hooks a pail of milk onto each end of the yoke, carrying his load that way. I thought," said Mr. Crow, "that people had stopped using neck yokes 50 years ago. It's been that long since I've seen one." "Well, no wonder I made a mistake," Jolly Robin said. "I'm too young to have heard of a neck yoke." And he laughed and chuckled merrily. "It's a good joke on me," he said. But old Mr. Crow didn't laugh. "There you go, making noise again," he scolded. "A person can't be safe around you." And he hurried off across the meadow. Mr. Crow was always very nervous near the farmhouse. Jolly Robin stayed where he was until the hired man went back to the barn. He saw then that what Mr. Crow had said was true, and he kept laughing long after the sun had set. Chapter 21. A Gloomy Tune. Jolly Robin often complained about the mournful song of Willie Whip Poor Will. Willie lived in the woods just a short flight from the orchard. It annoyed Jolly to hear the endless repetition of Whip Poor Will, for hours after his bedtime. Worse still, Willie often started his tune an hour or two before Jolly wanted to wake up in the morning. On moonlight nights, Willie sometimes sang non-stop from dusk until dawn, which was enough to strain Jolly's nerves. "What a dreary tune," Jolly Robin would mutter. "I've got to have a word with that bird and convince him to sing something else." However, Jolly didn't like staying up late. He needed his sleep. Besides, Willie was always silent during the day, resting or napping on the forest floor. One day, luck was on Jolly's side. While flying through the woods, he spotted Willie sound asleep in his usual spot. Without wasting a second, Jolly landed nearby and gently poked him awake. "I've been meaning to talk to you," Jolly said brightly, as Willie blinked groggily. "What's going on?" Willie asked, his eyes wide with alarm. "Is there a fire in the woods?" "No," Jolly replied, "I just need to talk with you." Willie looked annoyed. "In the middle of the day? Who does that? Everyone knows midnight is the proper time for a visit." "Well, I'm asleep at midnight," Jolly explained, "unless it's a moonlit night and you're keeping me up with your singing." At this, Willie's scowl softened into a sly grin. "Oh, so you stay awake to listen? I didn't know you enjoyed my songs." Jolly couldn't help but laugh. "Enjoy? You've got the wrong idea. Actually, I was hoping you'd consider changing your tune. That song of yours is too depressing. I could teach you my cheerful, cheerily cheer-up song instead. It's a real hit, and I'm sure your neighbours would appreciate it. Why not learn it now?" But Willie didn't respond. To Jolly's astonishment, the bird had fallen back asleep mid-conversation. "Hey, wake up!" Jolly tapped Willie under his wing. Willie started awake and blinked in confusion. "Huh? What happened? Did a tree fall?" No, Jolly said with a sigh. You fell asleep while I was talking. Oh, Willie mumbled. Does it really matter? I'm sure you're used to that by now. Before Jolly could respond, Willie dozed off again. Jolly stared at him baffled. How could he teach Willie a new song if the bird couldn't stay awake? Determined, Jolly gave him a sharper poke. Did you hear what I said about your singing? He shouted in Willie's ear. Willie stirred slightly and muttered, It's just my rheumatism acting up, don't mind me. And just like that, he was snoring again. Jolly Robin sighed, realising that convincing Willie to change his song might just be a lost cause. Chapter 22. Shocking Manners. Jolly Robin tried his best to wake Willie Will from his daytime nap. After several attempts, he finally admitted defeat. Willie was just too sleepy to make sense of anything, let alone learn a new song. I guess I'll have to wait until sunset, Jolly sighed. That's when Willie always wakes up and starts singing. I'll come back then. With that, Jolly left the woods and stayed busy for the rest of the day. As the sun dipped behind the mountain, Jolly returned to the spot where he had last seen Willie, only to find that he had already left. Sitting on a low tree branch, Jolly scanned the area. Just as the sun disappeared, a familiar voice echoed from deeper in the woods. Whip poor Will, whip poor Will. There he is, Jolly exclaimed, taking off to find his nocturnal friend. He could tell Willie was a good distance away because he could hear the low chuck Willie always gave before launching into his song, a playful warning that nobody could stop him. It wasn't easy for Jolly to track him down. Willie kept moving, darting about to catch insects between verses of song. By the time Jolly found him, it was nearly dark. Hey there, Willie called out as soon as he spotted Jolly. It's been ages since I've seen you. Jolly laughed. Don't you remember me stopping by earlier today? You must be mistaken, Willie replied. I've been asleep all day. Nobody came to see me. You must have forgotten, Jolly said with a chuckle. But it's fine, I can tell you now. I wanted to talk to you about your singing. He paused and yawned widely. It was already his bedtime. Make it quick, Willie said. I haven't finished my breakfast and I'm starving. Jolly found it strange that anyone would be eating breakfast after sunset. He was about to comment on it, but another yawn escaped him. Before he knew it, he had tucked his head under his wing and fallen asleep right there on the cedar branch. Willie blinked in surprise. How rude, he muttered. He fell asleep in the middle of our conversation, but I suppose he doesn't know any better. Curious about what Jolly wanted to say about his singing, Willie hesitated for a moment, but hunger won out, and he flew off to hunt for more insects. The moonlit night gave Willie plenty of time to search for food, pausing only occasionally to sing his distinctive song, the very one Jolly couldn't stand. But Jolly was so deeply asleep that, for once, Willie's singing didn't bother him at all. Chapter 23. A Cold Greeting. When Jolly Robin woke up just before dawn after spending the night in the woods, he was disoriented at first and didn't remember where he was. As it happened, Willie Poor Will was settling down to sleep on the ground right beneath the cedar tree where Jolly had perched. When Jolly finally looked down and spotted Willie, it all came back to him. Oh no, Jolly chuckled nervously. I fell asleep here last night. I can only imagine what my wife will say when I get home. He thought about waking Willie to talk about learning a new song, but the thought of his wife's reaction made him so uneasy he flew off without a word. And just as he had feared, when Jolly reached their home in the orchard, his wife wasn't happy. She greeted him coldly, barely saying a word. Trying to lighten the mood, Jolly explained, chuckling, how he'd accidentally fallen asleep in the woods while visiting Willie Poor Will. But his story didn't amuse her in the slightest. You should be ashamed of yourself, she said sternly. Willie Poor Will is a no-good rascal. Everyone knows he prowls the woods all night and only manages to sleep at daybreak. And his wife is no better. They're too lazy to build a proper nest. Mrs. Whitwall Will just lays her eggs on the ground. That should tell you everything you need to know about them. If you're so fond of their company, maybe you should go and live in the woods with them, Mrs. Robin snapped, turning her back on Jolly and busy tidying her nest. At the time, Jolly and his wife had 5 little ones who were too young to leave the nest, let alone fly. They chirped hungrily, clamouring for their breakfast. Hoping to smooth things over, Jolly flew off to gather worms for the family. but when he brought them back, his wife refused. "You might as well eat those yourself," she said coldly. "I can manage just 5 without help from someone who doesn't even come home until morning." For 2 days she kept up her frosty attitude, making Jolly feel thoroughly uncomfortable. From that point on, Jolly stayed well away from Willie Whip or Will, determined to avoid any more trouble.